Guess if I got 5 minutes left and I'm still talking, I better be quiet. Sit down. Might have some people throw some forks at me. You might be smelling that food here after a little while. You've seen the cartoons where that aroma is going through the air and the people, they smell that and they start getting on their tippy toes and they start floating towards that aroma. Well, you do your best not to think about that for a little while. And we'll be down there here soon enough. I know the congregation does such a good job of putting this on, and I'm very appreciative of the folks involved to get everything done. And always a good meal, always a good time, and I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm thankful to be here with you, and I appreciate that great prayer. And I say great because I do need prayers. We all need a little bit of prayer, don't we? And so anyway, I appreciate that prayer about our child that has not come into this world yet, but we are anxiously anticipating it to happen. And that will be November 8th is the due date. Sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes they take a little bit longer. And so anyway, I just hope that she's healthy. If she's healthy, because we talked a long time ago. I said, well, is it a boy or a girl? I said, well, as long as it's healthy, everything will be fine. And even if it's not, we're still going to love it the best that we can. And so here's the thing. I really appreciate those prayers, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate the congregation, the elders, everything involved. And in today's age, not unlike too many other ages, you've got to be careful who you share your pulpit with, don't you? And so I appreciate the confidence that they had to invite me here and to speak about this particular topic. Well, my wife, she could not be here with us today. And so, please be giving her your prayers. Every once in a while, she's very sick, as you can understand, from different things. And my wonderful mother-in-law, she is watching on OABS, and I got some points by saying that, didn't I? Until I mentioned it. Then I lost those points, but that's okay. I will live. I really appreciate the comment that Brother Williams made about the younger generation mingling with the older generation, of whom Jack Williams is not a part. Okay, he is not part of the older generation. But anyway, I appreciate that because I feel very inadequate whenever I come here. Been here once before. I feel very unquiet. It's very similar feeling to that of when I was in preaching school and we would have chapel sermons, and you've got the entire all the instructors sitting there, and you've got all these very learned men that they're very knowledgeable. And so I feel like many of you have probably forgotten as much as I know, or maybe even more. And so anyway, I feel very inadequate on that. But even more so that I have to speak after a Yarber. Wow. The Yarbers do a great job, don't they? I appreciate that family so much, and it's just a great thing to see a generation there, isn't it? It's wonderful. And so I was assigned our topic here, if you want to call it a topic, our character that we're going to study, that of Matthew. Whenever I was assigned a particular person or character in the New Testament to speak about, I thought, well, I'll be given, someone who's kind of in the background over here, somebody that, maybe not be so much of a forerunner. And then I received the email, you speak about Matthew. I said, wow. Really? I felt honored, and I also felt at the same time that that's a kind of a huge responsibility. He's responsible for so much when it comes to Christianity, isn't he? He is a major character. But I'm going to kind of jump ahead for a second here. He's not really spoken of much in the New Testament. That's amazing. He was able to do so much, and yet was not spoken of very much at all. So I'm going to do my best to try and look at Matthew, see who he was, and learn some things from him. The Bible is full of great characters. And Paul himself, through inspiration, and I think it's amazing that Paul would say through inspiration, be ye followers of me, as I am of Christ. 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1 there. That is an amazing statement, isn't it? For him to say, be followers of me, and he would write that through inspiration. It shows me that God thought a lot about Paul. God thought a lot about him. Considered him, esteemed him very highly. And so, through inspiration, he would write that. But here's the thing. How can I know anything about Paul if I didn't have things revealed to me about him? Be a follower of me. Well, who are you? I have no idea. And so as you look at these different characters, these different studies in the New Testament here, things have been revealed. And also there are characters that are of a negative sort that have been revealed to us as well. What my challenge is, our challenge, is to look at these characters and look at the good things, apply them to our lives, do the best we can to be like them. But also to look at the negative things, look at the negative characters, look at the things they did wrong and say, I don't want to do that. I want to be different from that. That is a huge challenge. Because when it comes to Matthew and whenever it comes to Paul, whenever it comes to whoever you're talking about in the New Testament besides Jesus Christ, we're just like them. You see, we're the creation. We can be what God wants us to be if we will faithfully follow His Word. We can be used in His service. And when you think about Matthew, that's very special. Whenever you consider from whence he came. Again, there's so much to cover as far as the book itself, and we're not going to have enough time to cover everything, obviously. But I do want to hit some highlights as we go along here a little bit later. You consider Matthew. First off, let's talk about whom he was. Who was Matthew? Look over at Matthew chapter 10. Matthew reveals something about himself that I think is just amazing. And I don't know that he thought of himself, but notice what he says about himself. In Matthew 10, in verse 3. Here you have the list of the apostles. All the names are given here. But in Matthew 10 and verse 3, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the publican. Right? I mean, immediately he attaches something to his name here. Matthew the publican, the tax collector. First off, when you consider his character, I want to say this right here. He would be hated. I want to say it again. People would not like Matthew, except those that were in his same profession or similar profession, you see? Because the Jews would have said, this is a traitor. He's a no-good traitor. That would have been the attitude. But you think about it even further. What is a publican often likened unto in the New Testament? You read publican, what do you usually read right next to it? Sinners, right? They're put on the exact same scale. Is it necessarily that a tax collector is a sinful man? No, it's not. Let me say it like this. If there were a member of the IRS among us, well, how would we look at them? Would we say, there's a sinful man over there? You can't say that. It's his job. It's his profession. Would some people not sit next to him? Would some people be careful about their pocketbook flipping open while he is watching? You see where I'm going with that, don't you? We must love. And I believe the Jews first off missed it right there. Just because he is of that profession, many people would hate him. Oh, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm going to take your money. Really? I'm going to go over here and give it to the Romans. What? Not only are you going to take my money, but you're going to give it to these folks? He would be a very disliked man, wouldn't he? I remember I was jogging. When I could jog, as you can tell, I enjoy a good meal. But I was jogging around the track there in Trenton, and there was this fellow that was very fit. He was a very fit man, and so I caught up to him. I'm trying to meet folks. I was new to Trenton, and I was trying to meet folks out there. We're running around this track. We're talking for a long time. He is absolutely just cursing up a storm. I mean, everything. And, he wants to talk that way. Of course, I don't approve of it. But I'm still going to try to have a conversation with this man, you see? He's got a soul. He needs to obey the gospel, doesn't he? And so anyway, we're running around this track, and here's what he says. He says, so what do you do for a living? I want to say this right here, that I try my best to dance around telling someone I'm a preacher when I first meet them. Okay? Am I ashamed of it? No. But I have come to find out that many times people are very turned off by that. People won't be themselves around you when you tell them that. As a matter of fact, when I told this young man that the answer, He immediately stopped in his tracks. I mean, seriously, our sneakers went to a stop. And we're looking at each other, and he said, I am so sorry for everything that I've been saying here. Sir, please forgive me. And I said, as far as you and I forgive you, of course. But I'm not really the one you need to talk to. Right? See where I'm going with that? When Matthew would have been around someone, it would have been a very similar thing, wouldn't it? There would have been a dislike towards him. Look over at Luke chapter 18. We'll come back to Matthew here in a minute. But just to the extent of how tax collectors were looked at, notice Luke chapter 18. We're very familiar with this, the Pharisee and the publican. But in Luke 18, look at how the Pharisee considered the publican. Verse 11. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. He wouldn't even acknowledge that guy was there. He said, prayed with himself, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. Do you really see what he did here? He put this man that he knows what about. He knows nothing about this man. And called him as bad as a man who would go and cheat on his wife. As bad as a man who would break his matrimony, his marriage, right? That's something sacred. If you believe in marriage, that's a huge thing to compare somebody to. He's as bad as that, just by the fact that he's a tax collector. Now we come to find out just how the tax collector was in his mentality, wasn't he? He was a pretty decent man, wasn't he? He said, I am a sinner, forgive me. Which one of the two were justified? Well, it definitely wasn't that Pharisee. Okay? And so Matthew introduces himself, one of the apostles, a publican. I think it's really neat that is attached to his name. That's how he'll be remembered. Right? That's through inspiration, what he told us. But you look at Mark chapter 2, you see something else about Matthew, and I'm not going to get into whose brother he was and all the things of that sort. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to spend the time doing it. All right? But anyway, Mark chapter 2 in verse 14, it says, and he passed by, he saw Levi. This is Matthew. They're the same person. Saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. Matthew, Levi, this and just a few more times are the only times he's mentioned in the New Testament. I'm serious. That's it. Acts 1 and verse 13 is one more time that he's mentioned as far as out of the gospel accounts. And what was significant about his name? Well, I really don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I might have an idea or two. I would say this right here, that likely he was bilingual, or he at least was able to communicate Greek and Hebrew. Why would I say that? Because of his profession. Because after all, who's going to put someone in service in their work that can't even speak their language, right? The Romans are going to come along, and perhaps maybe they had someone who spoke Hebrew on the Roman side. I don't know. But you see, maybe he was someone who spoke two different languages, and that was valuable in his work. I don't know. But I do know it says that he was sitting there taking people's money. I know that's what it says about him. But look at a couple other accounts here. Matthew 9 and verse 9. Same thing, same situation. Matthew 9 and verse 9. And as Jesus passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom. He said unto him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. Same person. Luke chapter 5. Going back there in the book of Luke. I'll get the full picture here. Luke 5 and verse 28, 27, 28. And after these things he went forth, saw a publican named Levi, same Matthew, sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, follow me. And he left all, rose up, and followed him. Here's what I want to point out about Matthew here. Who was Matthew? He was a man that would give his life over to Christ. You know how I know that's who he was? Because it doesn't say that he forsook a little bit. It doesn't say that he thought about it for a while and said, might be a good idea to follow Christ. No, it says he forsook everything. There are people in occupations. Their work, they need to forsake it, don't they? Matthew's case in particular, maybe he was doing things that were wrong. Maybe he was as sinful as people thought he was. We don't know. But I can look at the Apostle Peter, and what did he say about himself? He said, Lord, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. So maybe Matthew was like Peter. Maybe he was involved in those things. I don't know. But you know what's really interesting? No one brought Jesus to Matthew. When you read in the gospel accounts, he wasn't brought there. Jesus came to him. Many times you don't see it that way, do you? I wonder how Peter looked at Matthew. I don't know. I don't have idea about it. But I can look at the common way the Jews looked at them. Matthew would obey Jesus. You and I, we've got to be so careful in our judgments, don't we? See a man with tattoos running up and down his face, running like that, got, all kinds of things sticking out on him. Well, he'll never obey the gospel. See a man that's caught in the bottle. He can't find his way out of that bottle. He'll never obey the gospel. I remember I was at a store. This man pulled up in an old Ford truck with his left wheel on the curb. You can't do that, okay? You can't do that. This is a two-way street. And he came walking into that store and he said, I don't care what the police say to me. He said some other words I won't repeat. And so he said all these things. I don't care if the cops pull me over. I thought to myself, wow, if I were this store owner, I would kick you out right now. I say, sir, you got to leave. He'll never obey the gospel. He'll never follow Christ. Slow your roll for a second. Did any of us come out of things that we should not have been involved in? I want to say yes. I don't even know all of you. I know some of you. But I know that sinful man can change. But I also know that we need to be careful in our judgments on folks. Men change. That is the point of the gospel. Don't you give up on somebody too fast. They may just go on to do great things. Right? But consider Matthew a little bit further. He was from a particular area that was special as well. He was from Capernaum. If you look over at Matthew 9 and verse 10, it says that to us. Matthew 9. And this is taking place in that area. Matthew 9 and verse 10. And it came to pass, as Jesus sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came, sat down with him and his disciples. And so why do I say he's from Capernaum? That's the context here, this area. Because we're talking about Matthew's house here. This isn't just someone else's house. You say, well, Dustin, how do you know that's Matthew's house? There's no way that you know that's Matthew's house. Actually, I do. Luke 5. You put the two together here. Luke 5 and verse 29. See, I'm trying to paint the whole picture for us here. Luke 5 and verse 29, it says, and Levi, Matthew, made a great feast in his own house, And there was a great company of people from his own profession. Seriously. There was a great company of publicans and others that sat down with them. Obviously, this was Matthew's house. Again, we don't have a lot about the things Matthew taught. We don't have a lot about the things that he preached. We don't have a lot of those things. Do I believe he did those things? Yes, I do. Can I prove it? Somewhat. Yes. But here's one thing I do know. And I know this. That even if Matthew was not the best preacher among the apostles, even if Matthew wasn't the finest personal worker, do you know what Matthew can do? He can bring people that need to obey the gospel to Jesus. I try to encourage the brethren, and I say, you're not the best personal worker? Guess what? Neither am I. Neither is anyone. You're going to say you're the best personal worker? You need to work on yourself a little bit, don't you? Right? But even if he could not do those things, which I believe he could, I'm not saying he can't, he could at least bring them to Jesus and let Jesus teach them. That's what he's done here. He made a great invitation, got all of his friends. I want to use that word so carefully. You know, we're not told that his friends kept on following him. We're not told a whole lot of the situation. All we know is we got the Pharisees saying, look at Jesus eats with publicans and sinners. That's who Jesus is. He's a sinful man, basically, is what they're saying. Guilty by who he is hanging around. We know what that's called, don't we? Taken a little bit too far sometimes, isn't it? But anyway, he could at least bring his friends to him. I want to say I'm so thankful for folks who would have that mentality. I have a hard time sitting down talking with them. Bring them to church. They're interested? Bring them. How about this? Why don't we get together sometime? Well, there's going to be a fellowship meal here next Sunday. Oh, why don't we get together? There's a gospel meeting going on down the road here. Why don't we get in the van and go? There are opportunities that sometimes slip through our fingers all the time, aren't there? We can do great things. Now, I mentioned Matthew's friends here. Sometimes you find out who your friends are, right? Were these people here in Luke 5 verse 29 sinful folks? I want to say likely. I mean, we've all sinned at some point, right? But were they these evil, greedy, tax-hoarding people? I don't know. But something I find out, and something that maybe you have found out, is after you come to Jesus Christ, after you've obeyed the gospel, you're going to find out who your true friends are. I had a bunch of friends growing up, and I changed, and they left me. Then I had to make new friends, and I value their friendship a lot more. The apostles were comrades together, weren't they? Yeah, they bickered and argued. Don't friends do that sometimes? But they got over it. Matthew did what he could, couldn't he? Prepared this great feast. Who was Matthew? Well, you look in the New Testament, again, only one more time as he mentioned. Acts 1 and verse 13. That's it. And he's numbered there with the 12. Literally, I don't know anything else about him past that point. So we ask the question, was he a major character in the New Testament? Yes. And no. You see? Yes, he was. In the book that he wrote. I mean, it is the first book of the Bible. It is the very bridge from the Old Testament to the New Testament. If the book of Matthew were not there, there'd be a huge piece of the puzzle missing. We would still need it. And so let's consider that for a minute. I can learn things about Matthew by what he wrote. I can learn things about him by the things that he wrote here in this book. Now, real quick, I just want to look at the book overall. Matthew chapter 1, it's about the birth of Christ. It's about the birth of Messiah, about the genealogy, proving that Jesus is whom he said he was. You see? Well, one thing we've got to really understand is that it wasn't like he wrote it while it was happening. Okay? It was something that would be delivered at another time, telling them of what happened. Okay, so it gives that bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some 126 verses, I believe it is, in the book of Matthew are actually quotations of the Old Testament. What Matthew is doing is he's trying to prove to the Jews. He's trying to say Jesus is the Messiah. He is the one that you should have been looking for. They were a little mistaken, though, weren't they? Even the apostles were. Remember, before Acts chapter 2, and I believe Brother Wayne Brewer did a great job speaking about that in Acts chapter 2 there. But remember that they asked Jesus, they said, "At this time wilt thou restore again the kingdom to Israel?" It's times like that I realize how much lower than Jesus I am. You know why I say that? Because I'd have been tempted to go off on those guys. Lose my cool right there on the spot. You still don't get it, do you? But he didn't do that, did he? He rebuked him. But they missed it. They needed to understand that the gospel was for everyone. So you've got the birth of Christ in chapter 1. Chapter 2, the wise men come along. How many were there? I don't know. Right? You hear 3 all the time. Could have been. Who knows? Flight to Egypt. Jesus is baptized in chapter 3. Chapter 4, the temptation of Christ. And then I want to point out chapter 5 through 7. You want some of the most intense, hardcore sermon material in the New Testament? Matthew 5 through 7. That is some of the most intense sermon material you're going to find. I remember in Trenton, I've got one of the elders here with me this morning. He probably remember this, that I started a series on it. And I come to realize this series could go on forever. And by the time I get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, if I cover every little thing along the way, I can just start over again. And it would be like it was fresh. So every once in a while we'll revisit some of those things and progress a little bit further, you see. But it is some of the most intense sermon material you're going to find. And a direct rebuke of many of the Jews' way of thinking. He's correcting a lot of things. Yes, he's giving a new law, but he's correcting a lot of their mistakes. Matthew chapter 8, the miracles are pointed out especially there. Peter's mother-in-law is mentioned. Oh, hold on a second. There are some folks that if you tell them that Peter was married, it's like they just are amazed that you would have the guts to say that. You actually said that to me? He was a married man. Likely children. Mother-in-law. Right? I don't know if he had children or not, but the point is he was still a married man. Not the first pope. Matthew chapter 9. This is finally when Matthew's called. Think about all the things that happened before Matthew even got into the picture here. He would have to have inspiration to be able to write some of these things, wouldn't he? As perfectly as he did. People try to refute inspiration. Hold on a second. He nailed it perfectly with the other accounts and with the other truths you find in the New Testament. Matthew 10, the limited commission. 11, Jesus, who rejected, gives that great invitation. Matthew chapter 12, the Pharisees are upset over the Sabbath day healing. Boy, again, I would have lost my cool there probably. I'd have tried so hard not to. Hard to be a Christian around some folks sometimes, isn't it? But anyway, he did not. He taught them the truth. 13, the parable of the sower. Matthew 14, Jesus feeds 5,000, walks on water. Matthew 15, pointed out so much. And I'm very grateful that it's pointed out like it is. The fact that traditions are elevated to being equal to the Word of God. They draw nigh to me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. Traditions. Traditions are a good thing, but there's going to be many people lost over traditions. There will be many people that are going to wish they would have listened to Matthew 15 and verse 8 and 9. You're not going to be saved by traditions. You're going to be saved by the Word and obedience to it. Matthew 16, I find it very interesting that this is the only one of the 4 gospel accounts that the church is mentioned. Now, the kingdom is mentioned in other accounts, I understand that. But the word church, the idea there, as far as Jesus saying, I will build my church. If the book of Matthew were not there, guess what? We've got a gap here. There's still a piece missing. Matthew records Jesus saying, I will build my church. Singular. He still steps on the toes of folks, doesn't he, today? And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Singular. Matthew still upsets folks today by what he wrote. Because you have the idea of so many churches out there, but there's only one. Only one that saves. He said he would build his church. Jesus, Matthew 17, transfigured. 18, he teaches about humility and forgiveness. Matthew 19. You want to talk about some upset folks? You bring him over to Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9. You know that? I was on the phone with an elder one time. Not in Trenton. Let me clear that up. I was on the phone with an elder, and I quoted to him Matthew 19 and verse 9. He was off on it. He wasn't following it. And he said, my Bible doesn't say that. Sir, what Bible are you reading? I was with a new convert one time. She was single. She expressed her obedience to obey the gospel. She was ready to obey it. I knew there would be things to work through after her obedience. Do I wish things were done differently? Maybe. But I know I did what I could on that. She said, Dustin, I'd like for you to do a wedding for me. And if she ever hears this, please come back. Likely she won't hear it. But if she does, please come back. You know you need to come back. But she says, I need to have you perform a wedding for me. Would you do that? Well, hey, wedding is great, this, that, and the other. Let's go ahead and sit down and talk and see where we're going to go from here. You ever notice that sometimes people just open up to you like a book? All you got to do is get onto a particular topic. They will open up their whole lives. Everything that ever happened to them, they'll tell you. That's so helpful for me. Isn't it? To hear the things. You haven't even looked at Scripture yet. You know where to go from it. It's hard for them to change their story once they've opened up, right? Now wait, you said something else now? And she says, well, at 16 years old, I was married just to get out of the house. I don't understand that arrangement, but that's the way it was. And at 18, there was an agreement to get divorced. My heart does this number right here. It hurts. And this is what I do in cases like this. You can do this with a lot of things, though. I just kind of set it there. Her own Bible, I believe it was. Just set it there. Read Matthew 19:9. I didn't have to comment on it. I didn't have to give an explanation of it. Here it is. Well, Dustin, that means I can't be remarried. You want to cry because of the intense difficulty this human being is going to have to face now. Will I follow God or will I be lost? She left. She remained faithful for a while and left. But you want to talk about stepping on some toes, there it is. Real quickly here, Matthew 20, parable of laborers. Jesus enters into Jerusalem. 22, marriage feast. 23, rebukes those Pharisees. 24, I won't really encourage us to study that so much. It will put down so many premillennial doctrines, it's not even funny. Matthew 25, sheep and the goats. 26, Jesus betrayed. 27, Pilate proclaims the innocence of Christ. And 28, Jesus is risen. Real quickly here, I'll just finish up. Did I say real quickly all you once? Seriously, just a minute or two. What can we learn from Matthew? First off, we don't have to be a major player to have major impact on this world. Even if we only save one soul, and if that soul is only our soul, we've done well, haven't we? I wonder about Ananias, who baptized Saul. Did he really understand the impact he was going to have on this world? Don't give up in your preaching, in your teaching, in your faithfulness to God because you can't convert everybody around you. You get just one, you've done well. And no matter who we were, we can become someone great. Y'all heard the story about the big biker that was in the gospel meeting, fell down before everybody crying and repented, and he's a faithful member of the church. You ever heard that story? Stuff like that happens, doesn't it? Something else we can see is we shouldn't be afraid to tell the truth. Do you know what Matthew did when he wrote the book? He put a target on his back. You and I are facing a tough time in our country, and we cannot be afraid to stand for the truth, even if it means putting that target on our back. We must be faithful to God, no matter the cost. And I'm saying that, and if you ever hear of me not doing that, you tell me to straighten up. I'll do my best to tell you the same. Because we want to go to the same place together, don't we? I am so thankful for Matthew, for his good example, and for the book that he gave us. Thank you very much for your attention.